In this video, we're going to talk about the 7 things you need to get started plane spotting. Plane spotting is a pretty niche corner of the photography world, so knowing what equipment you need to get started can be pretty difficult. In this video, I'll cover the 7 most basic things you need to get started. Let's get right into it. As plane spotting is a form of photography, of course, the first thing you'll need is a camera. Now, this can be a basic point and shoot camera, or something a bit more advanced like a DSLR or mirrorless camera, like the one I have here, a Sony a7 III. If you don't want to invest too much in it to start with, you can also use just your phone. But keep in mind that the type of shots that you can take with your phone will be a bit more limited. So with both the DSLR and mirrorless cameras, there's going to be 2 options, the APS-C cameras or the full-frame cameras. With the APS-C cameras, generally they're a bit less expensive, a bit lighter, and they fit in a smaller form factor. They also come with what is called a crop factor. Depending on the brand, that crop factor may vary between 1.5x to 1.6x. And what this means is basically that your images will naturally appear more zoomed in. They have a narrower field of view. Contrast that with full-frame cameras, they tend to be a bit more bulky, a bit heavier, and generally more expensive. But with that, you get a larger sensor, which means you're going to be able to capture more of the scene, which gives you a wider field of view. And also, because you have a larger sensor, you're going to be able to absorb more light from the scene, giving you a higher image quality and also better low light performance. Now, should you go with a DSLR or a mirrorless camera? As with anything, there are pros and cons of each. And I'm not going to get into that in this video, as there are already plenty of resources on YouTube talking about the differences between the 2. But ultimately, for our purposes of plane spotting, it really doesn't matter which one you choose. It all comes down to personal preference. Personally, I shoot with Sony mirrorless cameras. The one I'm filming this video with is the a7R IV, and this one I have here is the Sony a7 III. But I also know plenty of spotters who use DSLRs from both Canon and Nikon. So it really doesn't matter. Personally, if you're just starting out with plane spotting, I would recommend getting an entry-level APS-C camera just because they're a lot less expensive, and also they tend to be a bit more simple to use. Also, with the native crop factor, that will really help in getting that extra reach you'll need for shots that require a lot of zoom. If you're willing to invest a bit more money in your camera setup, then of course, definitely consider the full-frame DSLR or mirrorless options. As I said, they tend to have much higher image quality, as well as superior low-light performance. Keep in mind though that even lenses for full-frame cameras end up being a bit more pricier. So keep that in mind when making your budgeting decisions. Also, because you don't have that native crop factor in the camera, you're going to be needing to get lenses with a higher focal length to be able to achieve the same level of zoom as an APS-C camera. Now onto the topic of lenses. Which lens should you choose for plane spotting? Now there's a huge variety of lenses, ranging from wides to telephotos, primes, macro lenses. But for plane spotting, you're typically going to be shooting the plane from a distance, meaning you'll want a telephoto lens. Telephoto lenses have a higher focal length, allowing you to shoot farther distances and basically let you fill the frame with your subject. Some common telephoto lenses for plane spotting are the following, and I'll list them on the screen. The lower number represents the focal length at the widest field of view, meaning the most zoomed out, and the higher number represents the focal length at its maximum zoom. The aperture for these types of lenses generally vary between 4.5 to 6.3, but there are some faster and more expensive versions that go down to f4 or f2.8. The lower the f number, the more light that lens can capture, meaning a lens operating at f2.8 will be able to take better low light photos than a lens operating at f6.3, for example. However, for your first spotting lens, I do recommend keeping within the range of 4.5 to 6.3 just to keep the cost down. For my main spotting lens, I use the Sony 200 to 600 with an aperture of 5.6 to 6.3. Once you get a bit more comfortable and experienced with plane spotting, you can get more and more lenses to open up more possibilities in the type of shots that you can take. For example, I have Sony's 70 to 200 lens as well, with an aperture of f2.8. And that fast 2.8 aperture really helps in those low light situations, especially during the night. And that's what I primarily use this lens for. If you know you're going to be doing a lot of shots where you're standing close to the airplane, or maybe you want to take gate shots at the airport terminal, then you'll want to invest in a wide-angle lens as well. A wide-angle lens will basically let you capture the entire aircraft even from a very close distance, such as the 16-35mm f4 lens that I'm currently filming this video on right now. One thing to keep in mind is that there are lenses produced for APS-C cameras and lenses produced for full-frame cameras. So make sure you get the lens type that is right for your camera. Otherwise, it may produce some undesirable results in your images. Once you have your camera set up, the next thing you'll need, of course, is something to store all those photos on. And that's where the memory card comes in. When looking to buy a memory card, there's two main factors you need to consider: the size and the speed. Firstly, you want to get a card that can comfortably hold at least a day's worth of photos, plus a bit of extra. The worst feeling is to actually run out of storage space as you're about to take the coolest shot of the day. And trust me, that's happened to me before. Now, a day's worth of photos is a pretty subjective measure and it really depends on how you shoot, but I say aim for about 1,000 photos that you can store on your memory card. The storage space required to hold 1,000 photos will be a bit different depending on the megapixels of your camera. If you have a higher megapixel camera, you're probably going to need at least a 128GB or higher, but if you have a lower megapixel camera, you can probably get away with using a 32GB or a 64GB memory card. In Planespotting, you're going to be doing a lot of continuous burst shots, which means you'll be holding down the shutter trying to get a lot of shots in quick succession. What this means is that you'll want a fast enough card that can write those photos quickly without it filling up your camera buffer. If you take a look at the card specifications, you'll notice that there is a read and a write speed, such as 100 megabytes per second, 120 megabytes per second, or even 300 megabytes per second. The higher the number, the faster the card is. One thing to keep in mind is that a card can have different read and write speeds. In this case, the more important number we want to be concerned about is the write speed. Cameras that have a higher megapixel count that produce larger photos will generally require a faster memory card. If you're not sure what memory card to get, take a look at your camera's manual. Chances are there'll be a list of some recommended memory cards or at least some recommended speeds that you should be getting. For myself, I used the 128GB SanDisk Extreme Pro, which has a read and write speed of 300 megabytes per second. I do use a pretty high megapixel count camera, so I do need a faster memory card like this. But depending on which camera you're using, you may or may not need such a fast memory card. Okay, this one is pretty simple. You're going to want to carry around an extra battery for those long plane spotting sessions where you might be taking a lot of shots. It's a good way not to miss out on any important shots just because your camera ran out of juice. Come here, say hi. Hello. Right there. No, right there. Okay, that's good. Go up on the sofa. On the sofa. When I go on spotting trips, I always carry around a bag with me to hold all the gear I might need throughout the day. That might include my other lenses, other camera bodies, extra SD cards, extra batteries, lens cleaners, or even just a bottle of water. The amount of gear you have and the type of trips you usually take will determine the size and the features you need in your bag. Personally, I use Peter McKinnon's photographer bag, which is a highly customizable and feature-filled bag that has a lot of pockets for your accessories, your gear, and your camera. If you're going to be taking a lot of night shots or long exposures, you'll want to invest in a tripod. A tripod will really allow you to use longer shutter speeds to capture more light without getting blurry photos. A couple of examples where you might want to use a tripod are de-icing shots or gate shots during the night. Now let's talk about some of the apps or websites you can use to really elevate your plane spotting experience and make it much more enjoyable. The first one is Flight Radar 24, which is an app you'll find almost every spotter using. This is a flight tracking app that shows you a live map view of all commercial flights around the world, as well as the arrival and departure schedules at every airport. This is very useful if you want to know what airlines or aircraft you can expect to see throughout the day, or if there are any special liveries around. Note that the app doesn't track military aircraft. The next one is not an app, but a website called liveatc.net. This website has the traffic control frequencies of almost all airports, which you can tune into and listen to. This is helpful if you want to know which runway a particular aircraft is assigned to, or whether an aircraft is calling in to request for pushback. It just lets you get some advanced warning of the aircraft movement in case you need to reposition to get the shot that you want. For example, you might expect an aircraft to come in to land on runway 26 right, but the tower may have decided to assign them to runway 26 left instead. Listening to these frequencies will reduce the chance of these missed opportunities. Alternatively, you can also pick up a radio scanner from Amazon for about $100, which would allow you to do the same thing. You'll also want to have some kind of weather app on your phone that lets you see obviously the weather, but also the wind direction and the wind strength. You can use this to predict the runway configurations and how that might change throughout the day so you aren't caught off guard. One of the apps I really like to use is called Windy and has a pretty cool way of visualizing the wind speed and the wind strength at different times throughout the day. It's available for both Android and iOS. After a day of spotting, you'll want to have some kind of editing software to edit or at least touch up your photos. Now, everyone's workflow differs greatly here. Some people barely do any editing, while others, including myself, can spend hours in Lightroom or Photoshop just tweaking away and combing through every detail of the shot. In any case, you'll want to have some kind of software that allows you to do that, whether on your phone, your iPad, your laptop, or your PC. Personally, I like editing on my PC because I think it gives me the most amount of precision and control, but it's really up to you. I use Adobe Lightroom and Photoshop, but there are a lot of other editing software such as from Topaz or Luminar, or even some free ones you can find on your phone's app stores. And that brings us to the end of this video on the 7 things you need to get started plane spotting. Hopefully that was informative for anyone wanting to get into this really rewarding hobby. And if you're already a plane spotter, hopefully you learned a thing or two that you can end up incorporating into your own workflow. I've linked all the gear that I personally use and can recommend in the description below, so I encourage you to check them out. For full disclosure, as an Amazon influencer, I do get a small commission from any of the products purchased through those links. It doesn't cost you any extra to use them, but it does go a long way in helping me make more content for you guys. Let me know what you thought of the video in the comments below, or if you think I missed anything that every plane spotter needs in order to get started plane spotting. Until next time, thanks for watching, happy plane spotting, and I'll see you in the next one.